Welcome to this presentation about the Nazarite. I made this presentation quite a while ago, but then in Dutch, and recently I made a translation and I added a few slides. I would like to discuss with you what is a Nazarite. Secondly, how do you become it, and when does it end? How does it end? Thirdly, which Nazarites do we know from the Bible? Fourthly, what foreshadowing do we see towards Yahushua, or Yeshua, or Jesus, if you still call him that way? But that's not the name he had. Was or is Yahushua a Nazarite? If we try to answer these questions, it might be tempting to look at what Jewish tradition says. But yeah, after all, we belong to Israel. We have been incorporated into Israel, but we have not been broken away. We have not broken away from the Roman Catholic or other belief system with its traditions to step into a new tradition or another tradition. We always have to test ourselves what is being said to us. Let us not forget that the Jews that believe in Torah, that try to follow Torah, do so without knowing Yahushua. So they do so with a covering. What could be our starting point is to return to the Hebrew roots of our faith, meaning that we have to ask ourselves certain questions, like where does something first appear in Scripture? What do we read in the original Hebrew text? And thirdly, what thematic connections can we make? So what is a Nazarite? Nazarite comes from the Hebrew word Nazir. Nazir means to be dedicated to God when it is about persons, and it also means unpruned, not cut, when it is about grapes. The Nazarite ship is explained in number 6. There we read that it includes no wine or intoxicating liquor, so you were not allowed to drink that when you made a vow to be a Nazarite. It was not allowed to shave your head hair, and you were also not allowed to touch the dead. The first mention of Nazir we see, however, already in Genesis 49, verse 26. This also shows that it has to do with consecrating and setting apart. I will show you in the next slide. In Leviticus 25, it is even linked to the Jubilee year, where it is ordered not to harvest unpruned grapes. So here we have the first mention in Genesis 49, verse 26, where it reads, "The blessings of thy father were greater than the blessings of my progenitors. Unto the borders of the eternal hills they shall be upon the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the Nazarite, being the separate one of his brethren." If you look more closely at the Hebrew word Nazir, we see 4 Hebrew letters, the Nun, the Zayin, the Yod, and the Resh, with a total numerical value of 276. The first letter is the Nun, which stands for fish and life. The Zayin stands for set aside and weapon, also knife. The Yod means hand, and the Resh means head. So if we look more closely at these letters, we see a relation with the Nazarite ship as well, because you have to choose life. You are not allowed to shave your hair with a weapon, and you are set aside. Of course, it's pretty much about what you do, so therefore the Yod is relevant. And yeah, the Resh has several relevances here. The Nazarite shows a certain kind of priesthood, shows leadership, and also you were not allowed to shave your hair on your head. How could you become a Nazarite then? Well, 2 options here. Either by a vow of an adult man or woman, as described in number 6, so for yourself. It could also happen that your parents made such a vow, meaning you were separated as a Nazarite from your birth on, or even before that, when you were conceived. Number 6, describing the first option. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the sons of Israel, and say unto them, When either man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to dedicate themselves unto the Lord, they shall separate themselves from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine or vinegar of strong drink. Neither shall they drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried ones. All the days of the Nazariteship they shall eat nothing that is made of the vine, from the kernels even to the husk. All the days of the vow of the Nazariteship no razor shall come upon their head, until the days are fulfilled of the separation unto the Lord. They shall be holy, and shall let the locks of the hair of their head grow. All the days that they separate themselves unto the Lord, they are not allowed to touch a dead body. They shall not make themselves unclean for their father or for their mother, for their brother or for their sister, when they die, because the consecration of their God is upon their head. All the days of the Nazariteship they are holy unto the Lord. Which Nazarites do we know from the Bible? Well, I had to search for it, but I found a few that made a vow themselves. Most likely the Apostle Paul, as described in Acts 18 verse 18, but also for fellow believers for which he paid the cost of the sacrifice at the end of the Nazariteship, as described in Acts 21 verse 17 to 24. We also see at least 3 examples of Nazarites from the womb on, being Samson, Samuel, and John the Baptist. Question for you: what do you notice about the mothers of the Nazarites born and about the Nazarites themselves? Just think of those questions when we move on. I will come back to these questions at the end of my presentation. How does it end then, this Nazariteship? Finally or temporarily? Well, that could happen either by breaking a vow, for example, by accidentally touching a dead person. Then you were allowed to restart the Nazariteship. So you had to shave your hair and let it grow again, as far as I remember. But you need to check that, if that's true what I'm saying. The other option is an offering at the end of the vow period, and that was quite substantial. You had to bring a huge offering of 3 kinds of sacrifices. Animal sacrifices, that's the first one. Then the grain offerings, the second one. And thirdly, the libation of wine. And it was quite some wine, about 5.5 liters. Another question for you to think about: how often did Samson break the vow? Did he even break the vow? Yeah, like I said, it's quite important to look at thematic connections. And just look at the similarities between the Levites and priests on one hand, and the high priest, and also the Nazarite. When we compare the ban on wine, the ban on shaving your hair, and the ban on touching dead people, we can see that it's already quite strict with the Levites and the priests. Becomes more strict with the high priest, but it's at its strictest for the Nazarite. So, for instance, the Levites were and the priests were allowed to drink wine as long as they did not serve in the tabernacle. The high priest wasn't allowed, and the Nazarite wasn't allowed to do that. So that made me think, could a Nazarite become a priest alongside the Levites because of what he or she did? Could he even become a high priest by living out his or her vow? I mean, if we rephrase this question, what is needed to change the priesthood? I think 2 things here are needed. We need a high priest who does not perform his service properly, so he is sort of excluded from his service from then on. And secondly, we need a Nazarite who does that and therefore becomes a high priest instead. Question, of course, where do we see this in the Old Covenant and where in the new or renewed one? Well, I think we see two examples here. First, we have Samuel in the Old Covenant. Samuel was able to become high priest because other priests forsook their service, being Eli and his sons. But it takes more than that, of course. The only way that was possible was if something had already been arranged for this in the covenant, and that was the Nazariteship. Samuel became high priest by Nazarite vow. Even though he was not of the tribe of Levi, he could still become a priest, even a high one. That's how I see it. And I see it repeated in the renewed covenant by Yahushua. Yahushua could become high priest because another high priest, being Caiaphas, tore his clothes when Yahushua was on trial, and thus he broke his service. Caiaphas did. A high priest was not allowed to tear his clothes. But it takes more than that to be a high priest, because the other high priest is not doing well. We need some arrangement in the covenant, and that was the Nazariteship, of course, enabling Yeshua to become a high priest as well, even though he was not of the tribe of Levi, but the tribe of Judah. So the question is, was he actually a Nazarite or not? And when then? I mean, first, if we ask the question, was he a Nazarite? It doesn't seem to be the case, because he drank wine, right? And he touched a dead person. And okay, he was a Nazarene, with being a native of Nazareth, but that's not necessarily a Nazarite. Well, are these really the right questions? Wouldn't it be better to ask questions like, when did he refrain from drinking wine? When did he separate himself from his people? And when did he make the sacrifice that marks the end? If we read in Matthew 26, verse 29, but I say unto you, I will not drink from now on of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom, that might say something. Could be a starting point of the Nazariteship of Yahushua. Also, we read in Luke 24, verse 50 and 51, that he separates himself from his disciples, from his brethren, and he led them out as far as to Bethany, and he, well, it should be he with a capital letter in my view, lifted up his hands and blessed them, and it came to pass while he blessed them, he was parted from them and carried up into heaven. Third question, did he make the sacrifice that marks the end, and if so, when then? What I found in my research is that the opinions here are divided. Some say he did so on the cross, others say it still has to be fulfilled, because he drank vinegar on the cross, and the hair of his head was not shaved, and the sacrifices were not offered at all. Well, maybe it's both. I mean, Hebrew thinking is cyclical. So maybe there was a kind of first fulfillment on the cross, and there will be a complete fulfillment when he returns. Because, well, at least we can say that the sacrifice was not accomplished on the cross. You had to bring 3 animal sacrifices. You had to bring a lot of grain offerings and also 5.5 liters of wine for the libation offering. Yeah, we really have to be flexible in our mind to link that to Yahushua, I think, what he did on the cross. So I don't think he already fulfilled that. Other option, of course, could be that he was a Nazarite by birth. That explains not making a sacrifice because it didn't end. And perhaps he only drank the wine he had made himself from water, which is not wine from grapes. And perhaps we can say that he did not touch the dead people, and if he did touch them, they were asleep. And we also don't read about having his hair cut or shaved. So, could be. Well, I think it's most likely that Yeshua became a high priest when Caiaphas tore his clothes, so enabling him to become high priest instead. Then we see Yeshua making a promise at the last Pesach not to drink wine anymore, and after that he separated himself from his disciples at Ascension Day. It could have been he was one from birth, but why not a clear command then to Miriam or Joseph, as we see with Samson, Samuel, and John the Baptist? Also, like we saw already, he might have done things that were not allowed if he would have already been a Nazarite, like drinking wine and touching dead people. And of course, he would not be in conflict with Torah, so then he was not a Nazarite from birth on, that is. So I think it's most likely he became a Nazarite. It started when he was on trial for Caiaphas. And then he added his promise at the last Pesach, and then he separated himself from his disciples. So then he went up to his father as the new high priest. Okay then, finally some answers to the questions I raised. What did or do you notice about the mothers of the Nazarites born? Well, of course, they were all barren. They all had difficulties in becoming pregnant. We see that with the mother of Samson, we see that with Hannah, the mother of Samuel, and we see that with Elisheva, the mother of John the Baptist, of Yohanan. What did we notice about the Nazarites themselves? Well, at least that they were all men. How often did Samson break the vow? I wonder if he did. Maybe he did once when his hair was cut, because then he lost power, but he regained power afterwards. And it was not really his decision, was it? Okay, time for some bonus questions. Can you be a Nazarite yourself? In Judaism, they say you can, but you are stuck with it for the rest of your life because there is no temple where you can make the sacrifices. That's what they say. Also, you must fulfill the vow in the land of Israel. I'm curious to find out how you see it and what role Yahushua plays in this. Is it maybe possible not to be a Nazarite literally, but maybe spiritually? I mean, you can, of course, abstain from wine and other fruits of grapes, other products of grapes, that's what I should say. But you cannot bring the complete offering like it was described in Numbers, can you? So I'm curious how you see it. Also, we could ask ourselves, why would we do it? Well, in my case, I read Parshinaso and already had long hair. Just read Parshinaso and you will find out what I mean by that. And I needed a break from drinking. I already did that once or twice before for several months, but I wanted to connect this to the Nazariteship because I saw the relevance, the meaning it could have for being more devoted to God. Yeah, and also for me it was a means to work on my priesthood, to be really the priest of my family, and that's in most cases quite a challenge for men. Last question, what's hard about it? Well, that's a question, of course, that everyone can answer for themselves, but do remember, it's not about abstaining from wine only. It includes raisins, it includes vinegar, so it includes mayonnaise as well, for instance. Almost last sheet, an overview of the sources that I used to make my presentation. And you will have access to those sources if you will send an email to me and ask for a PDF. So then you will be able to click on the links. I hope you enjoyed this teaching, this presentation, and I'm looking forward to your views on this. Also, what you think about my idea that Yahushua became a high priest by being a Nazarite. By becoming a Nazarite, that's what I should say. Okay, take care, shalom, and test everything. Bye-bye.